All right. So thanks again for being here, everyone. Again, my name is Brenna Davis, and I'm very excited for our focus on ecological education and the Magis today. So to get started, we are going to begin with a prayer. Today is World Water Day, and so we have a prayer to celebrate this important day. And so today we obviously uplift the gift of water and remember that our lives are dependent on the earth and water for survival. Today we also obviously continue to uplift the people of Ukraine, and we pray for that the leaders of the world will move from battlefields to conference tables and that peace will reign. For all of these and any intentions we hold in our hearts, pray. Spirit, amen. All righty. So thanks again for being here today, everyone. I am flying solo in terms of admitting people. So thanks for your patience with me. We are excited to have Maura Toomb Estevez here from Regis High School in New York, and she is going to be sharing a bit about some great work that they're doing with their students there in terms of ecological education and really animating students to take action on the Laudato Si action platform. So before we begin, we're just going to briefly start with a land acknowledgement, as we often do, not another prayer. As we enter into this land acknowledgement today, I always do one for the land where I currently live, but I just invite you as we enter into this space to connect your feet to the ground where you are and to just bring to mind the stewards of the land, the people who are indigenous to the land where you currently live. And if you know the names of those communities, feel free to put those in the chat. And in recognizing the land upon which I reside, I express gratitude to the Native people who lived and worked here before me, those whose stewardship and resilient spirits have sustained the sacred land, which is the traditional homeland of the Erie, Lenape, Delaware, Shawnee, Wyandot, Miami, Ottawa, Potawatomi, and other Great Lakes tribes, and the nearly 28,000 members of the indigenous communities who still inhabit Northeast Ohio today. And then finally, we always begin with an acknowledgement of context, and this is just a moment to acknowledge that we are living in an unprecedented moment in the history of the world. And so it is important that we do come together to have these conversations because this will have an impact for current and future generations. So thank you for being here for this conversation. And before I turn things over to Maura, I'm just going to briefly kind of talk quickly about this concept of the Magis, because I think it's an important one and sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. And so as we're thinking about the Magis, which is taken from the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, it translates to the more, but it isn't about doing this kind of frenetic kind of activity, right? This capitalist mindset of our value being based on how much we can accomplish or how busy we are. The Magis is really about going deeper into what will bring about the greater glory of God, and what will bring about more abundant life on this earth. And so as we think about climate change and this ecological moment that we're living in, it can pull us in many directions, and we can feel like I need to be doing more and more and more and more. But this can actually create paralysis. So I think that this is just a really important kind of topic for us to hold in our hearts as people who are concerned about the environment. So the Magis comes from the second week of the spiritual exercises, from a meditation called the Call of the King. And the retreatant is asked to basically respond to a call from Christ to follow his work and his life, right? And really what Ignatius is inviting us to with the Magis is this idea about going all in on this call from Christ to be open to new and more authentic ways to serve his mission in this world. And so I love this quote from Pope Francis about kind of stoking this inner fire, and to kind of pull us from potential dormancy. And so St. Ignatius is a great example of the Magis. He completely reoriented his life to serve God and the needs of God's people. And in the second week of the exercises, we're invited to know the personal love of Christ, which can be a way to reorient our entire lives, right? To reorient the whole person. And I really love the quote that's attributed to Father Pedro Rupe, right? This idea of like falling in love with this mission of Christ and staying in love, and how can that completely change our lives, and free us and liberate us from disordered attachments or desires that are creating unfreedom. So each day of Ignatius's life, he discerned what Magis meant in ordinary circumstances, and really lived this out. So I did just briefly want to share this quote from the 34th General Congregation, kind of about the Jesuits' view of the Magis, because I think, especially as we face this frontier of climate change, we have an opportunity to think about climate change as an opportunity, as opposed to an obstacle. And finally, I think that the last important thing to consider as we think about the Magis is this idea of, it's again, not a compulsion to do more. It's really about making space for God's grace to enter. And so James Martin has this like really apt example of like, it doesn't mean simple quantity. So like a parent folding more and more diapers, right? That's not necessarily accomplishing the Magis because they're doing more as if to win some sort of contest. But he says a parent folding diapers and caring for their child may try to do it with more love, not only for the child, but for God. And that is kind of the heart of the Magis. So as we're thinking about Jesuit education and education in general, and all of the contexts that we in this Zoom room are doing that, our call is to invite people into deeper into God's love and into Christ's work to renew the earth. And I think that ecological education and conversion can be a really beautiful path forward to extend this invitation to deepen this collective work. It can be really creative for young people and more seasoned people to engage deeply with their vocation, because that's ongoing, and an opportunity to reimagine and to give space to fall in love with creation in a quite absolute and final way, as is attributed to Father Pedro Rupe. So with that, I would like to turn things over to Maura, who is going to share a bit about ecological education, what that looks like at Regis, and kind of how her students, she's inviting her students into this this process of the Magis and exploring their vocation and creativity and God's love.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maura Toomb Estevez. I am a theology teacher at Regis High School in New York City. And I'm going to talk to you about a course that I teach called Environmental Theology, but particularly one project that we worked on this fall, and really how it ties in with some of these themes that Brenna has just highlighted, particularly Magis. So let me share my screen. As I get started, I should say I obviously come at this from the context of being a high school teacher. So this is going to be very like, here's exactly what I did in my class, and here's how I scaffolded the project, and et cetera, et cetera. But hopefully, in whatever context you serve or minister, there's something for you. And if you're not sure what that is, feel free to email me afterwards at mtoomb, and I'm happy to throw ideas around that might fit your own context. So, so let me just tell you a little bit about how theology classes work here at Regis. Environmental theology is a senior elective. We work on a trimester schedule, so we have 3 trimesters. Each is about 12 weeks long. All seniors have to take theology, but they get to choose what electives they take. And we as teachers get to choose what electives we teach every year, which is really fun and a chance for us to kind of show our creativity or our own interests. So this is an interest of mine in the realm of theology. This is my 2nd year at Regis. And it's actually the first time that I'm teaching the class, or that I taught the class for the full 12 weeks. I went on maternity leave last year in the middle of my very first year. So I didn't get to see this project through to fruition. So I was excited to be able to have a chance to do that this year. And I had 20 students in the class for this fall trimester. And like I said, it's an elective, so it's 20 kids who self-selected into environmental theology, or at least ranked it somewhere between options 1 and 5 of what was available to them. So let me give you kind of a brief overview. We do 5 units in this class. Each unit has about 4 classes dedicated to it, 4 or 5. The first is kind of complete immersion in Laudato Si. We read the whole document and apply it to their own lives. It's really the baseline for the course. Unit 2, we take a lot of material that is actually taken more from like kind of MBA classes, but we apply it to theological thinking. And we're looking at the ecological self, which is obviously a theme from Laudato Si, and this idea of systems thinking. What kind of thinking do we need to kind of harness to be able to solve complex problems of the ecological crisis? Unit 3, we look at a preferential option for the poor. How does climate change make a preferential option for the poor, and how should we make a preferential option for the poor in our response to it? And then unit 4, which is where this project comes in, is what structural and systemic changes can we make? This kind of takes us from this idea of the ecological self and our personal formation into, well, how do we leverage that? And then unit 5 is ethics in environmental theology. So as they prepare to move on from the course, how should they think about making the kind of everyday decisions, whether it's them as a part of these systems and structures or as individuals? Something that I noticed this year, more so than last year, with the kids coming in, is they were struggling to harness hope in ecological work. You know, they are 17, 18 years old, and part of them is like, this is all on us now, which feels a little paralyzing. And part of them is like, we can't do anything as individuals. It's big corporations. It's, you know, this is beyond the scope of our control at 17, 18 years old. So the goal in having them do this project, where they basically designed a systemic change to our school, to Regis, was to help them harness that. Like, what does it look like to propose and design a change to somewhere that you do know and you do have some influence and ownership of? So that's what we move through content-wise. This is the project itself. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I presented it to them in a minute, like what scaffolding I proposed. So this is from my prompt, and I'm happy to share the prompt with all of you, but you will work in groups to imagine one institutional change Regis can make to better care for our common home. It can be a change to our physical plant, academic, extracurricular, or formational programming, investment policies, or something we have not discussed in class. You will outline what the change is, why you chose it, and then how it aligns with our call from the Universal Apostolic Preferences and this document, Caring for Our Common Home, an Ignatian Perspective. We are signing on to the Laudato Si action plan, and it's actually something that has come out of the work of this course, and also our social justice theme for the year for the whole school is caring for our common home. But we hadn't kind of gained in November the traction around the action plan that we had around this document, which is specifically for high schools, middle schools. So this document I can link as well. It's on Educate Magis, which is the platform for Jesuit high schools and middle schools worldwide. They had to make an argument for why the change they were proposing is the most effective change that Regis could make to institutional policies. And the other requirements are what I think are particularly interesting about the program or the assignment. They had to interview the appropriate Regis administrator. So they couldn't just come up with this and then say like, well, this is what we should do. They had to interview, you know, if they were proposing a change to our investment policy, they had to interview our CFO. If they were proposing a change to our physical plant, they had to interview our VP for operations. If it was something about formation or curriculum, the assistant principal for academics, et cetera, and get like an idea from the leadership level of how would we actually do this? What implications would this change have in the day-to-day life of the school that we as students might not recognize or understand? And then they had to incorporate the other course themes that we had already addressed. So how does this change that you're proposing make a preferential option for the poor? How does it utilize system thinking? How can it develop the ecological self of students or other constituents at the school? And how are the themes of Laudato Si coming alive? How did I prepare them to do this? Did I just say like, figure it out? So we had some scaffolding along the way. First, we did a class on the Universal Apostolic Preferences. What are they? Where did they come from? What kind of discernment process did they grow out of? What was the timeline for that? And why are they important to these, 20 high school boys as students at a Jesuit school? Then we started talking about other institutional commitments that have been made to kind of give them a model. So we did a class on institutional responses that other Catholic organizations have made: divestment, land use, food sustainability, and specifically we looked at a number of high school programs from around the Jesuit schools network, so they could kind of like gain traction of like, well, how have high schoolers done this specifically? They read the Caring for Our Common Home document, and they also read the document Ignatian or Jesuit Characteristics for Promoting Ecological Justice that came out of the Curia. And then the most helpful part of this, and I'm not just saying this because he's on this call, is Nick Napolitano, who is the Provincial Assistant for Social and Ecological Ministries from USA East, came to class and kind of put all of this in context for them. Hey, here's what other organizations specifically in your province have done. Here's how all of this comes alive. So they did those, it was 3 classes worth of work before. And then this year specifically, I was going to a conference for 4 days. So they worked on this project while I was at the conference. This, like, when class would have met, they had working time. And that was when like they could be in the school building and knew that they would all be there and available to interview the different administrators, et cetera, et cetera. So what did they come up with? I feel like that's like the real important question here. We had 4 groups of 5, so 4 projects, 2 proposed curricular changes to the Regis curriculum, 1 proposed a sustainability change, and 1 proposed a formational change. The curricular changes were a more intentional integration of environmental themes into our current underclassmen theology, English, and science courses, with then more electives. Right now, environmental theology is the only elective that has a specific environmental lens to it. So they wanted to see the development of a commitment to environmental themes through an interdisciplinary lens in the underclassmen levels, and then more options to express that in the upperclassmen levels, including summer courses. That was one group. And then the second group wanted to see how can we do kind of in-depth, how can we address the environment in an in-depth way in freshman science and then junior Christian ethics. So instead of like a more seamless integration, kind of doing a fuller immersion, but doing it twice throughout their time at Regis, rather than waiting till senior year to get assigned to the environmental elective. The sustainability change was a proposal that we start composting. I will say, like, from a teacher project assessment quality standpoint, this was the best done project because they did the most research into what composting in New York City would really look like. Not only did they interview our vice president for operations, but they interviewed people from, they got information from the Department of Sanitation, and they interviewed people from nonprofits that facilitate composting for organizations. So they really did their homework. Quite literally, it was their homework. And then the last one I thought was really the most interesting of the 4. They want to change essentially how we communicate what we value as a school. So they, the 4th group, were really captured by the idea of Sabbath in Laudato Si, and how we are called to take Sabbath with the earth and with creation. And actually, Nick knows this. When he was in the class, one of the kids who ended up being in that group was like, how are we supposed to like take time to think about the environment? We have like so much on our plates. Like, we don't feel like we have the bandwidth to do this. So they proposed essentially changing how we communicate what we value through what alumni we feature, right? And like what careers they are in, and how we structure the time of students. So they ended up interviewing our assistant principal for academics, asking about how can we build more time into the students' unstructured time into students' curriculum. And they interviewed our vice president for advancement, who oversees fundraising and alumni relations, and said, like, you know, we unintentionally give this message that, you know, you should make the most money or have the most high profile job because those are the alums who are on the website or coming to speak at senior day, or, you know, so how can we reframe that to represent all different kinds of success, including success in caring for our common home, which I thought was really thoughtful and well done. So my takeaways from these projects, some are kind of more reflective and some are logistical for those of you who might be high school educators on the call. First, the projects really surprised me this year. They were more existential than I expected. The kids really grabbed onto this idea of their own formation, their own ecological self, and how that can be done through what they learn and through what's communicated to them. Last year, the projects were much more, you know, we should utilize our green roof more, and we should, like, more in the composting vein, which was also an excellent project. Another takeaway I had was that students need a practical outlet to cultivate hope. Like, they did complain a little bit to me about the number of hoops they had to jump through to do this project, but at the end of the day, like, they had something to show for it. And they knew that I shared their projects with, like, the completed projects with the corresponding administrators. So like, our president got all of them, but also like our VP for operations got the composting one, our AP for academics got the curricular changes one, our VP for advancement got the formation and alumni relations one. So they knew that these kind of went beyond just the classroom. And actually now the group who proposed the composting project has been working with our, we call it JFR, John Francis Regis Day, our committee, to look at the feasibility of composting for next year. Very practically, I would build a feedback step in along the way, which I would have done had I not had to go to a conference for 4 days. One of those days would have been working with me in class so that I could have offered more intentional feedback as they were working on the projects. And then I think very practically, there is a tension between assigning a project like this that proposes an institutional change when I am but a lowly teacher, right? Like, you know, like, I'm not the president, I'm not the principal, like, and I had to be very honest with them and saying, like, you're going to do this work, you're going to propose this thing, I will communicate it to the appropriate people, but I cannot guarantee that XYZ will happen next year. And to be very upfront with the students in that, but also myself, right? Like, of course, I see these projects and I'm like, yes, we should do all of these things. Great job. So that was kind of one of my takeaways. I have talked a lot. So what questions do you have? And you don't really need to look at a slide that says questions, so I will stop my sharing for right now.
Yeah, so thank you, Maura. And yeah, anyone who has any questions or follow-up thoughts, just feel free to unmute.
Or you can put them in the chat too.
Or you can put them in the chat.
So I have a question. What curriculum materials did you use? Do you recommend anything in particular?
Sure. I'd be happy to share my whole kind of course outline with all of you. I'm not greedy with it. For the ecological self, we read Peter Shine, and for the systems thinking, no, Shine is, his first name is not Peter. Peter Senge for the systems thinking, and Shine's first name is escaping me right now for ecological self. There was a really great presentation that Guy Consolmagno gave to high school educators a couple years ago. I guess it was summer of 2020 that I used to talk about perspective and Laudato Si. And then ultimately for preferential option for the poor and the ethics of environmental theology, we use a lot of like current events. So this year we did, for preferential option of the poor, we did an article about a refinery in Philadelphia and how it intersects with low-income neighborhoods. I did JVC in Bethel, Alaska, so I always show them this short film about realities of climate change in Alaska. But I can share all of that with Brenna to push out to all of you.
Great, thank you.
So thank you very much. I'm Michelle, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and we are really, at our school, we're a little bit of a smaller school, but we are really focusing on Laudato Si and these environmental issues. We had one of our students actually very mindfully set the ball rolling with a project that she was doing, and contacted one of our alum who's an investor and very much also involved in the environmental issues. And so she sits on the board of our school. this alum, and she worked with some of our students, and they came up with an environmentally responsible investment plan that they proposed to the board that was adopted. And so that kind of buoyed the spirits of our students a little bit, because as you were saying, sometimes, you know, that wheel of progress is a little bit slower turning, and it really kind of dampens hope. I love that you shared all of this, and I really appreciate that. I think you gave really good information, and I put in the chat to Brenna as well. If this could be shared with all of us, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you for everything.
Oh, thank you. That's really cool that your student and your board member, like board
No.
members never get to talk to kids. That's great.
I know, it was really interesting. She was doing a project for a scholarship, and she had different stakeholders that she needed to interact with, and she was really interested, and still is very interested in environmental issues. And so she just took it across the board and really was extremely effective. It was a ton of work for her, but she really sunk her teeth into it, and it will last here for a long time. Her investment and her offering will really be a gift to our community for a long time.
That's great. Julia, you have your hand up.
The work that you folks are talking about is incredibly exciting, and certainly hearing from folks that are right here tied to this webinar right now is exciting too. My question to you is, do you have any ties to the North American Association for Environmental Education or your local environmental ed associations? I do know that NAAE, North American Association for Environmental Ed, now has a environment and spirituality team, and with the blog and ways to communicate. And it just seems as though, and maybe this is a question for both you and Brenna, that this sort of presentation would be really wonderful to be able to be shared somehow on that platform. Is that a possibility, Brenna and Maureen?
I can say from my perspective, I don't think we have any existing relationships with them. Our biggest environmental relationships are with NICE, New York Association of Independent Schools, has like an eco sub network that our eco club is pretty involved in. So we have shared some good resources there, but I'm definitely going to look into this because Brenna just put it in the chat. So thank you.
Great. And I'll make some sort of contact with them and figure out how to put you on that platform or this whole presentation on the somehow. Brenna might be able to help as well. So thank you. It's just really wonderful work.
Julia, it looks like Gus had a question in the chat. Gus, you can feel free to unmute, or we can just read it. Whatever.
Yes, please read it.
Okay, cool. So Gus said,
without the grammar mistakes.
okay. So Gus says, and this is just for folks who will watch the recording as well, what has been the obstacles that you have had to face implementing this theology of Laudato Si at an administrative level, staff level, and with your colleagues? Does this idea transcend the classroom and become a part of the whole school strategy when deciding on schools' policies?
I mean, I don't know if you specifically want my input or anybody on the call. I would say for me, this has been that tension that I was kind of speaking about. As far as the Laudato Si action plan, like we have full support from our school administration to sign on to it. And actually the Jesuit Schools Network, which covers all Jesuit high schools and middle schools, has encouraged everyone to sign on to it by Earth Day. So that is a part of it, and I will be like spearheading that. And then we have to create an action plan by next fall. So I know that we have the administrative support there, but like I said, there is some tension in I don't feel like I can take every single project that kids create and say, well, the kids made it, so now we have to do it. Like, you have to put all the resources behind that. So it's kind of about being discerning of what are we, I don't know what the word I want to say, but how do we do that? And then I just saw this other one. How are we handling the reflection and assessment for the action plan? Students are involved. So part of our JFR day for this year, so John Francis Regis Day, is our social justice theme for the year, is caring for our common home. Every homeroom is coming up with their own individual commitments, and then we're kind of taking them all together. So I will work with our administration to fill out like our school assessment, and then the action plan will be built from what the whole school brings out after our day in May.
Thank you, Maura.
You're welcome.
And then it looks like Peter had one more question, which was, do your schools join the Global Education Alliance of Pope Francis? Is it recognized in your area? I'm not familiar with that. Are you, Maura?
I am not.
Yeah, Peter, if you want to unmute, or if there's anything you want to put in the chat about that.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Do you hear
it's a
me?
little.
Okay. Is it better now? Yes, fine. Yes, this Global Education Alliance is a call of Pope Francis with some other organizations and the United Nations. It is Global Alliance to promote the ecological, socio-ecological conversion within the education. And the base document of this Global Education Alliance and all the 7 goals it has is inspired by Laudato Si. So it's tightly rooted in this document, and one of the goals is also to let the children grow in the good relationship with the environment we live in.
Great. Thank you, Peter. I just Googled it. And if you know of any like official website, I saw the announcement, but if you have anything that you want to put in the chat, I would love to share that out. And I'll definitely read more about it and share this with everyone. And then Fran just shared the Healing Earth curriculum, which is awesome and is run out of Loyola Chicago with Mike Shook. So if folks, Fran, do you want to say anything else about that? If folks aren't familiar, it's wonderful. You're on mute, Fran.
Yeah, I don't. I've always been intrigued by it because it looks so complete, but I really don't know very much about it. So just wondered if anybody else has used it.
And
Healing Earth is a really good resource if for anyone designing any sort of class like this. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I want to be aware of time, and we always do like to have some breakout time so folks can have conversations. So I'm going to divide folks up into breakout rooms. If you are not excited about that idea, this is your moment where you can exit. And we will just break out for about like 10 minutes. So it'll just be pretty quick. Oh, people are dropping. Okay, 1 second and we'll get started. I do have some announcements at the end that I think will be exciting, but I don't know that I can entice people to stay for that. So, all right, we're going to have about 10 minutes. Let me just move one other person to kind of even things out a little bit, and we'll get started. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you again for just making the time to be here. Maura, let's just take a moment to thank Maura for her great work, for her presentation, and for all you do with your students. It's really inspirational. as we wrap up today, I just have a couple of announcements that I wanted to share before we leave. And so again, this is not as seamless as if Michelle were doing it, but all right, nope, I'm not trying to share the presentation, I'm trying to present it. So just a couple of announcements. We are currently, we have a couple of programs at ISN. We have Laudato Si Lent. So there's a guide that just walks you through all 7 of the goals for the Laudato Si action platform that you could use in your community. And then we also have a daily Lenten reflection where we would invite you to reflect on a different justice issue. And the theme for this year is Harden Not Your Hearts, a Lenten Journey in Holy Frustration. Another announcement I wanted to make is Education for Justice is the other part of my job. I run our Catholic social teaching website. And so the prayer that you saw at the beginning, I saw somebody asked about it. It can be found on Education for Justice if you're interested in signing up for a membership. And then finally, what I'm really excited about is my colleague at the Jesuit conference, Meg, is going to be offering an eco poetry retreat kind of in honor of Laudato Si month for May for the Renewing the Earth cohort. And so we are planning on doing this at the beginning of May because we realize there's a lot happening during Laudato Si week. So it'll be offered May 2nd through 5th. And I just wanted to kind of put up a poll for people. I will be sending this out to the whole list, but if you had a preference for what time of day we would do this, you should see a poll on your screen. We're either thinking about doing it at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, or kind of closer to when we normally meet for Renewing the Earth. So like a 3 or 3:30 start time for the East Coast. So if you want to vote, I would just appreciate it because we want to offer it when the most people are around. Okay, so it looks like 3:30 is winning at this point. So that's helpful to know. And I'll reach out to the whole list. And it'll just be, we'll have a poem and then time for discussion and a Laudato Si quote. So it'll be really simple, no homework that you need to do. And you're welcome to bring poetry and quotes from Laudato Si that inspire you as well. And then finally, I wanted to share one last resource in the chat, which is, this is also on the agenda for today. We just created this like 3-minute video, and it's just like a really basic explainer of all of the Laudato Si Action Platform websites. What's the difference between Laudato Si Action Platform.org versus God's Planet versus what the heck is Renewing the Earth versus now the Jesuits have their own thing going on. And so it's just a quick explainer to kind of show you where you need to go for whatever you want to do. So I hope that that can be a helpful resource as we're all continuing to journey together with the platform. So if anyone has any final thoughts or closing thoughts, feel free to share them now. Otherwise, thank you for being here and happy World Water Day.
You
I just
able to
wanna-
send a link to that, the prayer that you started with, or I didn't catch the name of the person?
Oh, so I will put this in the follow-up email. There's a website called Education for Justice that the Ignatian
Okay.
Solidarity Network runs. And so it's available on that website.
Okay, thank you.
Just want to say that the Lenten resource for the Laudato Si goals is something is worth keeping after Lent because it's a really good example of simple language, engaging language, examples of things that you can do. So don't throw it away after Lent.
Yeah, I'll put that in the chat, and I'll also be sure to link to it in the agenda for today with the follow-up resources. And I'll also share all of Maura's resources that she has so kindly shared in the chat. So.
Just a word on World Water Day presentation that CRS is doing. Dr. Tsetse is presently, he's going to be talking on that, but he's presently at the week's water conference in Dakar, Senegal. So he knows what he's talking about, so.
And do you have information about that? Is that, Julia, is that the same thing that you had shared with me? Or if there's information about that anyone wants to put in the chat, please, please feel free to do so. I feel pretty overwhelmed sometimes. I can't keep up with all the great stuff that's happening.
I was just saying that John is going to, John, you might mention the World Water Day webinar that the Diocese of Charlotte that's
That's
different.
the one. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to type in the thingy, but if you get to it faster, please do that. But I'll try to put it right in here. So if everybody can come, that is this evening at 7, right, John?
Yep.
And it's slash.
I think I've got it, Julia. I just put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Let's not worry about my lack of technical expertise being shared with everyone on this call.
So I want to honor that it's 4:30. So thank you all for being here. I'm happy to hang on and answer any questions or just chat with folks. But thank you so much for all you're doing, and blessings on your Lenten journeys.
Well done.
Thank you. This was great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for joining our group, and thank you, John. And I'm sure the rest of you are going to thank each other. We had a great time.
Mhm.